This week on Stakelbeck on Terror, Christians are being massacred throughout the Middle East. But is there hope for a new day? We sit down with Middle East expert Walid Faris to discuss the democratic revolution he says is coming to the world's most violent region.
We have a trend for freedom. What we don't have is a U.S. policy to partner with these Muslim Democrats and Middle Eastern Democrats.
And then, in a Stakelbeck on Terror exclusive report, we provide never-before-seen footage of Al-Qaeda training in one of their new safe havens, the Sahara Desert region of North Africa. Plus, an Israeli victim of Palestinian terrorism tells us about his experiences in the West Bank and how they inspired him to write a book about the Islamic threat to Israel and America. And in the Stack Attack segment, we explore the meaning of a popular jihadist battle cry. All that and much more on this edition of Stakelbeck on Terror. And welcome to Stakelbeck on Terror. You know, the deadly jihadist bombing of a church in Egypt on New Year's Day, which killed 21 Christian worshipers, barely registered a ripple in America's mainstream media. In the Middle East, however, it was a different story. Muslim leaders and media outlets from Saudi Arabia to Iran to Lebanon to Egypt all agreed. It wasn't Islamic terrorists who were behind the bombing, it was the Jews. Yes, those clever Zionists are up to their old tricks again, making Islam look, well, violent. Rest assured, all signs point to Al-Qaeda in this suicide bombing, and we'll have much more on them and Islam's persecution of Christians and, yes, Jews coming up. Now let's go to work. Well, persecution at the hands of Muslims is nothing new for Egypt's Christian minority. I sat down recently with Middle East expert Walid Faris to discuss the plight of minorities and democratic activists in Egypt and throughout the region, and how they're fighting back. Walid lays it all out in his important new book, The Coming Revolution. Here's our interview. Walid, welcome to Stakelbeck on Terror.
Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you here, and I want to start with one of the themes of your book. And in it, you talk about how the U.S. government has reached out to the wrong people in the Middle East. Talk about that a bit.
Look, over the past 4 years, the bureaucracy, and over the past 2 years, now the administration, is reaching out to the wrong people. They want to partner with the Muslim Brotherhood. They want to engage with the Taliban. They want to find moderates in Hezbollah. Now, these are the forces of oppression. These are the forces basically who wants to eliminate the minorities. Instead, the administration, the U.S. in general, should be reaching to the dissidents, to the forces of democracy, which are really seen all over the region, from Iran to Beirut to southern Sudan to the Berbers.
I want to ask you more about that, but first, before we go on, you mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood, you mentioned Hezbollah. Just for our viewers, some might not know the full ideology of those groups, why it's so bad to reach out to them. Tell us briefly what the Muslim Brotherhood wants, and briefly what Hezbollah and the Iranian-backed Shias want, what their vision for the world is.
Look, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Salafists, the Wahhabis, all these call themselves the Salafi jihadists. They want to reestablish a caliphate in the 21st century. That means they want to bring down 21 Arab governments as we know them, and not always good, and 52 Muslim states, and create instead a pan-Islamist Taliban-like regime which will suppress the minorities, which will cancel freedom of religion, which will lower the level of rights of women, and which will wage basically a jihad war against the West. The jihadi Khomeinist of Iran, the Shia background jihadi Khomeinist, wants to establish an Islamic republic, wants to strengthen Hezbollah, and wants to obtain the nuclear device.
It's a nightmare scenario, obviously. So why do you think the U.S. government is reaching out to these jihadist elements that want to wipe us off the map?
Look, because of the advisors, of the bureaucracy, and of the administration, most of the advice that we're getting is compromised. Petrodollars for the last 20 years have been funding our Middle Eastern studies, our Islamic studies. So who do you want to be produced by these compromised expertise? Unfortunately, we need to reform Middle Eastern studies, but at this point in time, the public needs to be aware, and that's what we are educating the public.
Why is it still so important to promote Arab Democrats, Arab reformers? I know a lot of people here in Washington have said, oh, it's not worth it. Democracy in the Middle East just won't happen. Why do you say in the book that it's so important to continue on that track and not give up hope there?
Because look what happened during the Cold War. There was the Budapest uprising. It was crushed. There was the Spring of Prague. It was ended. There was the demonstrations of the workers under Lech Walesa and Václav Havel. At the end of the day, the whole Soviet Union collapsed. So what we're having in the Middle East is something comparable, not identical. We've got the Cedars Revolution in Lebanon, 1.5 million people in the streets of Beirut. The Green Revolution in Iran, 1.5 million people in the streets of Tehran. The separation and self-determination of southern Sudan. The black uprising in Darfur and in the Beja areas of Sudan. The Berbers in northern Africa. We have a trend for freedom. What we don't have is a U.S. policy to partner with these Muslim Democrats and Middle Eastern Democrats, and even also the Christian Middle Easterns who will join also the train of democracy.
The average American doesn't even know about these movements you're talking about. How badly did the Iraq War and the attempts to bring democracy there, in the eyes of the American public, probably not very popular, how badly did that hurt the cause of Arab reformers?
Look, the dissidents that I speak with in democracy forces, Christian, Muslim, and others all tell us that the United States giving visibility to our NGOs, giving visibility to our leaders, to our causes, is all what we need at this point in time. We are persecuted with or without your intervention, so it's better that we are now known internationally and we are known to each other. What we've done is to liberate the Iraqis. What we have not done is to partner with the democracy forces in Iraq. Same goes for Afghanistan.
When we talk about democracy in the Middle East, the elephant in the room is Islam. Can Islam and true democracy be compatible, especially in the Middle East, where we have such a history of tyranny?
Human nature has shown in other parts of the world, including in ancient Europe and other parts of the world, that ideologies and all principles will have to cope with human nature, not the other way around. So in the Middle East, if you have an Islamic caliphate, if there is a Sharia which is pushed by the Muslim Brotherhood or the Khomeinists or others, at the end of the day, civil societies will rise and they will shape ideologies and they will shape the constitutions that they want. So yes, there will have to be reforms, but those reforms can only be possible when civil society is free. So first the battle of freedom, and then we'll engage in the battle of reform.
Thank you so much. The book is The Coming Revolution. It's a great read. Thanks, Waleed.
Thank you for having me.
Waleed Phares is one of the world's top analysts on terrorism and the Middle East. It's always a pleasure to pick his brain. Can the coming revolution he describes really happen in the Middle East? I pray that it can. What I do know for certain is that something's got to give there, and soon. Well, Imam Rauf, the Islamist face of the Ground Zero mega mosque, is on a speaking tour throughout the U.S. this month to talk up his pet project. But there's still no guarantee his Islamic victory arch will be built. In fact, one Washington, D.C.-based group has filed a lawsuit to stop it from happening. Here's Freedom Watch President Larry Klayman.
What we're saying to the court is, and we filed it in the Supreme Court of New York, the state court, because we felt that a state court judge would be more susceptible to following the will of the people, although it's a jury trial. We say this is a nuisance, is it increases the threat of terrorism in the neighborhood. And in fact, the imam has been forced to admit that. He says, if I don't get in my mosque, there's likely going to be terrorism here. So that's a threat. And in addition, we have the president himself saying that if Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11 with bin Laden's, ever tried, he's not going to be tried in that area because there's a threat of terrorism. So that's the fundamental basis, a nuisance to the people who live in New York City and in that neighborhood. And also it raises the tax rate. It raises the cost to the people of New York to have to defend this mosque. And it's absurd. I was walking in front of the mosque just a few weeks ago, and there were 4 police cars out in front. Now, why should we have to pay to protect the imam from us? We're not a threat to the imam. It's quite the contrary.
Great work here by Freedom Watch. And by the way, the Ground Zero mega mosque is much more than a nuisance. It's a deliberate thumb in the eye to the United States and the 9/11 victims and a symbol of Islamic domination. From Pakistan to Iraq to Yemen, the U.S. has turned up the heat on al-Qaeda, forcing the terror group to seek out new safe havens. They found one in a remote area of the Sahara Desert known as the Islamic Maghreb. Check out this Stakelbeck on Terror exclusive report featuring never-before-seen footage of al-Qaeda in action. The hunt is on for al-Qaeda, from Pakistan to Iraq to Yemen. U.S. pressure has forced the terror network to search for new safe havens. They found one in the Sahara Desert in an area known as the Islamic Maghreb.
The Sahara could be the next Afghanistan, a wide-open desert, a series of failed states with very weak militaries. It's the perfect breeding ground for al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, or AQIM, has set up shop in the deserts of Algeria, Mali, Niger, and Mauritania. Hardened al-Qaeda fighters there vow to target American interests.
There have been plots by al-Qaeda in the Maghreb to attack U.S. warships in the Straits of Gibraltar. There have been plots to blow up the U.S. Embassy in Bamako, that's the capital of Mali.
Terrorism expert Richard Miniter recently returned from North Africa. He supplied CBN News with exclusive hidden camera footage shot by an undercover informant who penetrated AQIM. Al-Qaeda fighters are seen here in the Mali desert, where they have several terror training camps.
They are training in the desert to carry out military assaults. And those same groups have carried out assaults on the armies of Mali, Niger, and Morocco. In fact, practice for taking on the U.S.
This is the aftermath from one of those deadly raids against an army patrol from Niger. AQIM is seen dividing up the loot they've captured.
Behind the circle of turbaned men, you can clearly see the pile of military hardware, both guns, ammunition, tents, and other desert gear.
This al-Qaeda jihadist was behind the 2009 murder of British hostage Edwin Dyer. AQIM uses money from kidnappings of Westerners like Dyer and other illicit activities like drug smuggling to fund its operations. Keep an eye on the Islamic Maghreb in 2011 as a new al-Qaeda hotspot. I've spoken to intelligence sources in that region who tell me AQIM is ready to branch out and target Western Europe and possibly even the United States. Coming up, a victim of Palestinian terrorism tells it like it is about the Islamic threat to America and Israel. And later, Sudan's president explains Islamic Sharia law for us. Cover your limbs.
From the world's leading Christian news operation, a groundbreaking step that brings you national, international news and analysis at your fingertips. The CBN News Channel. For the first time ever, you get the benefits of a full-time news channel from the renowned CBN News team, 24/7 on the web. CBN News Channel provides a new platform by delivering CBN News to a larger audience through the latest technology.
News viewers have made it clear they're dissatisfied with their choices. They want news without a spin.
CBN News Channel answers that need.
With a trustworthy alternative that's easy to find, easy to watch, any time of the day.
CBNNewsChannel.com. 24/7 on the web.
You know, no two nations are more affected by the global jihad than America and Israel. So who better to talk about the gathering Islamist threat than a man who has lived in both countries? David Rubin grew up in Brooklyn, but he now lives in the town of Shiloh, in Israel's biblical heartland of Samaria. His new book, The Islamic Tsunami, examines the America-Israel relationship in the age of Obama and Islamic terror. In part one of our interview, David discusses in gripping detail how he and his 3-year-old son were nearly killed by Palestinian terrorists in 2001. Check it out.
I know Islamic terrorism not just from books. I know it from firsthand as well.
Tell us about that.
Well, I live in a place where there is a disproportionate amount of terrorism. If you just walk in my neighborhood, there is a street in my neighborhood that has 7 houses on it. 5 of those houses have lost children in terror attacks. And I myself, 9 years ago, I was coming back from Jerusalem with my 3-year-old son, sitting behind me in the baby seat, when the car was hit by a massive hail of bullets. I was shot in the leg, my son was shot in the head, and well, it was just, I didn't know how to deal with the attack. We were in the car. The car was, he was shot in the head. The bullet, I later found out a bullet went through his head, his skull, causing a skull fracture. It went through his neck, causing internal bleeding in the brain. And the car was completely dead. The bullets were flying. I didn't know how I was going to get out of there. I spoke to my son. His eyes were wide open. His mouth was wide open. There were no sounds coming out. He looked like he was trying to scream or to cry. But I turned the ignition. I figured he's just in shock. I got to get to an ambulance. The blood is flying out of my leg. I couldn't get the car to start. I tried shifting gears, everything, park, drive, neutral. Every time turning the ignition, the car wasn't starting. Finally, the car started as if it had never had a problem starting before. I hit the gas, and I drove nearly 120 miles an hour to get to the next community where I hoped I could get an ambulance.
And meanwhile, your son is in the car losing blood.
I didn't know it. I didn't know it because it was in the back of his head.
3 years old.
3 years old.
Palestinian Islamist gunmen.
Yeah, they were from the Palestinian Authority.
Our partners in peace.
That's right. We found that out 2 years ago. We're talking, what, 6 years, 7 years after the attack.
So you didn't know for years?
No one claimed responsibility until I met someone who happened to be a former student of mine who was in the army and served in military court, and he told me, by the way, those terrorists who shot you years ago when you were teaching were caught, and they were from the Palestinian Authority. But the Palestinian Authority can't claim responsibility because they have to pretend to be partners in peace.
Well, the Palestinian Authority actually builds monuments to terrorists who've killed Israeli women and children.
Right.
The Obama administration doesn't want to fill you in on that, but that's the deal. And this brings us to the Shiloh, I should say, Shiloh Fund, Israel Children's Fund, which we don't only have a book to talk about, we also have an excellent program that David has started. After you were shot, after your beautiful 3-year-old son was shot, you started this program for victims of terror in Israel. Tell us.
He was coming home every night screaming. I mean, when he came back from the hospital. He was in the hospital for about 3.5 weeks, close to a month. When he came back from the hospital, after one operation, and there was still another operation to come, we were very concerned about him physically. Just, you know, as every terror victim is, you're concerned. You want him to heal. But the physical, we soon found out, wasn't the major challenge. The major challenge was that he was waking up screaming every night. And it was like that scream that he was trying to make in the car that he couldn't make. And I would hobble over to him. I was with a walker at that point. I had graduated from a wheelchair to a walker. And he would scream even louder because I reminded him of that painful attack. And, well, we frantically looked around trying to find some sort of psychological post-trauma therapy program for him, and there was nothing in Samaria. So eventually I started taking him to Jerusalem. We had to go back into the car after the trauma of being shot in his car. We had a different car at that point already, and I would take him to Jerusalem. But it was just so painful, and it took him months.
I can't imagine. I have a 3-year-old daughter of my own, and I can't imagine the physical part, but the mental. emotional.
It was just
Trauma.
so painful because I was his protection. Anyone who has a 3-year-old child knows how that child looks up to his or her father as this great protector, and I wasn't able to protect him. That was the most painful thing of all. But after talking to his kindergarten teacher about 1.5 years later, and she said to me, "Don't you realize that there are at least 5 children in your son's class alone who have either been killed or wounded in terror attacks or lost siblings in terror attacks?" And she said, "Those children need therapy. Those children need help." And it just goes outward from there, because any child who has a brother or a sister or a parent or even a teacher or a neighbor or a friend who's been killed or wounded in a terror attack is traumatized. And I knew that we had to help all the children, because all of the children have been traumatized in one way or another.
This is
from
life.
Terrorism.
This is daily life in Israel. This is how it is.
Well,
This is what Israeli women, children, innocent civilians are subjected to every day.
And when we go out on the roads, there is always that concern that it could happen again. And it has happened again to many other families.
And Americans need to hear this, David, because for anyone who hasn't been to Israel, you might not understand the proximity of Palestinian jihadists who want to wipe Israel off the map. They're right over the valley, as David said. You have to get on the ground in Israel and see it with your own 2 eyes. Hearing David talk about it, you realize what Israelis deal with every day.
But Eric, the response to terrorism, can be to go into a shell, as many terror victims do. They just become depressed. They go into a shell. I've seen this child after child, and they don't want to talk. Or they just become angry. Children bury it all inside. So I said we have to have programs for these children that will help them to respond properly. And I could have myself, I could have responded that way too. I could have become angry. I could have said we have to have revenge. Well, I'm getting my revenge. My revenge is to say, no, we're not leaving the biblical heartland of Israel. And we are going to build and rebuild the biblical heartland for the next generations.
Stay tuned for part 2 of my interview with David Rubin, in which we discuss President Obama, jihad, and Israel's biblical mandate. And to donate to the Shiloh Children's Fund, visit www.shilohisraelchildren.org. Up next, Sudan's president lays down the Sharia gauntlet for his country's non-Muslims. And later, before the Christians, they came for the Jews. We examine the long history of ethnic cleansing in the Muslim Middle East. Stay tuned.
The 700 Club. See it as never before. The stories, the places, the people. The 700 Club, now in HD. We'll take you to India, China, Africa, Thailand, and across the USA. So close, you'll feel as though you were there. Look into the eyes of the people you've helped and see the hope you've given them. Experience what God is doing in the world today in high definition. The 700 Club, now in HD.
This week's Sharia Flaw comes to us from southern Sudan, where a Christian majority has suffered decades of horrific persecution at the hands of Sudan's Islamist government. Many observers were overjoyed this month when the Christian South voted to break away from Sudan's Muslim Arab North and form their own government. But not everyone was happy. Sudan's pro-jihad president, Omar al-Bashir, said prior to the vote that if South Sudan secedes, we will change the constitution. And at that time, there will be no time to speak of diversity of culture and ethnicity. Sharia and Islam will be the main source for the constitution. Islam, the official religion, and Arabic, the official language. Now, Bashir also defended a recent YouTube video of a Sudanese woman being flogged by policemen who were enforcing Sharia law. He said, quote, "Sharia law has always stipulated that one must whip, cut, or kill." Hey, at least he's honest. But his fanatical devotion to Sharia doesn't bode well for Sudan's non-Muslims. Be sure to keep them and southern Sudan in your prayers. Enforcing Islamic supremacism on non-Islamic citizens. It's just another in a long list of Sharia flaws. Coming up, first the Jews, then the Christians. Learn about the jihadist grand strategy. Stay tuned.
You're watching CBN News Channel. Available on the web 24/7 at cbnnewschannel.com.
The recent upsurge in Muslim violence against Christians in the Middle East should come as no surprise. First the Saturday people, then the Sunday people, has long been a rallying cry for Islamic jihadists around the world. The Saturday people are the Jews. The Sunday people are Christians. And now that practically every Jew has been chased out of Muslim lands, the jihadis' bullseye is on followers of Christ. What's that you say? Jews lived in the Middle East other than in Israel? Why, yes, they did. Not long ago, close to 1 million Jews lived throughout the Muslim world in places like Iraq, Egypt, Yemen, and Morocco. Now, although they were forced to live as second-class citizens or dhimmis under Sharia law, these Jews made significant contributions to their host societies, particularly in Iraq. That all changed in the 1940s and 50s, in the run-up and immediate aftermath to the reestablishment of the State of Israel. Jews were viciously attacked in Muslim countries and subjected to deadly pogroms. Their valuables and belongings were confiscated, and there was a mass exodus of Jews from these Muslim lands into the land of Israel. In essence, the Jews of the Muslim world were ethnically cleansed, and only a handful remain today in those countries. Israel is their last refuge. And now the jihadists not only want to finish the job there, they want to do a repeat of what they did to the Jews with the Christians. Sadly, they're succeeding, while the world looks on impotently. By the way, I'm still waiting for all those Jewish refugees from Muslim lands to be reimbursed and get their property back. Maybe the UN will get involved. Then again, maybe not. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Stakelbeck on Terror. And remember, send all your questions here to the bunker to stackonterror@gmail.com. In the meantime, keep it right here as we report on the advancing global jihad that's in your backyard. Take care, and God bless.